Greetings, and welcome to the 80-Level Roundtable podcast. In each episode, host Kirill Tokarev invites video game industry leaders to talk about the world of game development. No topic is off limits as long as it relates to video game development. New episodes are in the works, so remember to follow us or subscribe and share with someone you know will also enjoy the podcast.
Today we have with us Anjin Anhut. He's from Germany, never mind the name. And we're going to talk a little bit about a new favorite game of mine, which is called Minute of Islands, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Minute
Hello.
of Islands. So, hi, thank you so much for joining us and sharing some of your time with us. So, Anjin, before we kind of go into like the nitty gritty and I start telling great things about your game, because I played it last night a little bit since I was traveling, I had some time to kind of get into it. I really enjoyed it. Can you maybe tell a little bit about yourself and maybe do a little intro into your studio?
Yeah.
Like where you guys are based, what you're doing?
Yeah. So I'm with Studio Fizbin. We are a small to middle-sized German studio. We are located in two cities in Germany, Ludwigsburg and Berlin, Germany. And Minute of Islands is our third big in-house production. We also do some contract work. This year we also released a game called Say No More, which has like an old Dreamcast sort of art style, and we are also going to release a first-person adventure. But Minute of Islands is like the big thing we have been working on for the last 2 to 3 years. Give or take. Studio Fizbin's first projects were point-and-click adventures, which explains a lot about how Minute of Islands looks, I guess. And my role in the project was game director. So I was responsible for bringing all the ideas and creative energies of the people together and kind of like direct it into a cohesive thing, hopefully creating something that is more than just the sum of its parts. And I'm also one of the writers of the game.
Yeah, it's great that I have you here because I have a lot of questions about that. So,
did you finish the game?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You probably have more questions when you finish it.
I think I still like in the very beginning, but it's captivating.
Cool.
So my question, I guess, is what were like the main ideas or like the key concepts that kind of kickstarted this whole thing? Like, you know, like usually something starts with like a movie or an idea or some kind of an image. So what was the thing in this case?
It's a collective process. So the game originally started with a game jam. So Tim Gaetke, our art director, who is like mainly responsible for the visual style of the game, he's also a published comic book artist. And during a game jam, one of our other directors discovered a comic he published in a zine, and was kind of like interested in the main character of that comic. Which has nothing to do with what the game later was, but there was like this spark and the aesthetic of the character in it. And so they had a quick game jam, trying to find something to bring several ideas together. A lot of people involved. Since we are German, we have quite a relationship with the North Sea, right? So that's a bit of like this where the island aspects come into it. And then from that, it developed under Marius Winter, who was the first director of the project, who then later moved on to make Say No More. That's why I was taking over. And the interesting thing is that in that phase where Marius was working on it, there was a lot of themes and story ideas, and also like this huge amount of concept art we did. And which was not very top down. So it was like everybody could bring in their ideas and stuff they feel could be aesthetically intriguing. There was always this tension between the cute art style and kind of like disturbing imagery that was always in the DNA of the project. And when I came into the picture, I took all these things and then basically wrote a script around them. So and that's where then the final game finally got its marching orders, so to speak, so we could start churning out the content.
So this is a very interesting idea. So basically, you have a bunch of like visual styles and like different elements, themes, and then you kind of connected this with some kind of story that is around it. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna share a little bit of my like impressions. So when I first, as you mentioned at the beginning, we did cover it before. Like so, we really like the way the art worked and the animations and all those like little details everywhere. That was a very interesting concept. And then I launched it on my Switch and I started playing, and it instantly reminded me of another game which is called Below, like an
Mm-hmm.
indie title, and it also starts, but they start a little bit different. But the whole this that they kind of push you into this world where you know nothing about, and then you kind of start swimming. You know, you learn how to do
Yeah,
stuff, and you
absolutely.
walk around and so on. So I'm very interested to know, how did you guys manage to figure out this world in a sense that nothing is clear, but it works. You know what I mean?
Yeah. The thing is, um, the main character Mo, right? She's at home in that world, so she already knows everything, right? She's always like ahead of you. You as a person who is now following her, um, you are there's no POV character for you, right? So usually in these kind of like big, sometimes like fable style adventure stories, the main protagonist is also the person who has to learn about how that world works, but she is already in there, and that's the device we use. So we constructed the relationships of the characters and the environment, and how these giants that are part of the game, how they affect everything, what the spores mean, and all these things. We constructed it around Mo as she experiences them, and then you are along for the ride. So she already has a relationship with the giants. She already has a personal relationship with these toxic spores that are threatening the island and are always a threat. And she knows all the NPCs already. She never meets any new person during the game. That's so and this is how we decided to present the universe to the player. So, and this has holes because um Mo is also not explaining stuff to you. You have to just follow her, and a lot of things are we treat them as given, right? Giants exist, period. So we don't need have any explanation about 500 years ago this happened and now there's giants, or if they are aliens or something. You can fill it up. That's not the important part. The important part is that they're here and what they mean to the main character, and you are along for the ride. That's how we structured it.
Do you feel like it was challenging for you guys to build? Because the story is great. I mean, when I kind of started getting into it, it reminded me of a play, you know, like
Yeah,
or a short story, or like or more like a play. Like it's something for the theater, right? If you would
yeah.
go and it kind of works. It's not even the movie, like it's more intimate, it seems to me, like because there's like this narrator who's kind of talking to you and explaining things,
Yeah,
and
and
it
it's
kind of
more.
reminded me.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead. No.
It's more about more. It's more like a person, or also like this fixed camera, which makes Mo kind of like, and also the NPCs like actors on
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
stage
yeah,
and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
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 I can relate that interpretation to the game. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, and the other thing that I really enjoyed it. It kind of reminded me a little bit of those like sci-fi books, and I don't want to say fantasy books because there's so much young adult stuff right now, and
Yeah,
I don't think it has nothing in common. But in a way, it's a very good you're drawn into this world. That's why I made this connection with Below, because it's another game when I was almost instantly drawn into the world. It's
yeah,
like you're kind of there and you want to go explore and figure it out, and like learn what's here and what's there. So can you talk a little bit about the way you guys decided to design this whole thing? Because it's like this dying thing where I don't want to spoil too much so people could go
yeah, yeah.
buy and play it, but there's like a lot of those, like the fish heads, and then there's underground, and there's this idea with these giants, and it's kind of like on this organic cyberpunky kind of feel. Very weird. I mean, when I saw the art style, I immediately thought it was made in Berlin, because it had these vibes from like the club scene or art scene, and we know like Berlin is a very artsy city.
Yeah.
There's like a bunch of artists there, and you can go in any like little hole in the wall, and there is going to be some kind of exhibition there, and people are going to be drinking wine and talking about pictures. But can you talk a little bit about your approach? Like how did you work out the look of it, locations, the islands, and all the magic that's kind of
Okay.
around it?
Yeah. Like previously mentioned, it started with a very like free form, almost like jazz jam session thing. So people could bring in whatever ideas they had, and it was then later my job to kind of like find a structure for it. And the main hook is that the something which you will discover when you complete the game, because uh, you ain't seen nothing yet. So there's like really crazy stuff going on in the later parts of the game, like really crazy, and everything is structured around the the journey, like the emotional, the internal journey of the main character. So um, the way the technology of the giants looks so alien and so obviously not human made is like one of those decisions which is made so that Mo, our protagonist, can feel like very special, and also kind of separated from her human relatives, because she has been like chosen to wear this Omni Switch, which is like this magic staff with the red orb, right? And she has been chosen by the giants, and the technology needs to look incomprehensible for a human, so that separation is stronger, and her feeling that she is kind of like alone in this and has to now do this alone, now that the giants have stopped protecting the islands with their machines. So these are the kind of things. And the underground areas, like you start the game waking up in your bed, but it's not in a house on an island. It's like 500 meters below in these H.R. Geiger style catacombs, right? So, and this is to illustrate her separation from the human, from any human connection she earlier has. And these are all the decisions that kind of like, when you have like the choice to do like future technology this way or that way or this way, you have to like make a decision, and that's where the direction comes in and says, okay, what are the feelings we need to support, and what is actually the stuff we want to say, not just what looks cool. So, and that's, for example, where the alien look of the machines come from. Um, and there's plenty of this stuff. For example, the fact that not every NPC is wearing a full covered face mask. This was also a decision, because it always depends on how strong the connection to that character is supposed to be. These are all the the decision we made, and every time there was Mo at the center. Also, the narration, for example, the narrator is quite unreliable because sometimes the narration talks in third person about the character. Sometimes it's kind of like relaying what is spoken or thought, and it's always in a way, and it will also change during the game, and it's always in a way that you feel the most what Mo is feeling in that very moment. When it comes to the the art direction, this is mainly because Tim, as a comic book artist, early on decided to go like full comic book look, even though it's a video game. And this sounds like something many games do, but very few games actually really do it. There's some, for example, some stuff that the weight of lines, like how thick they are, is 100% maintained throughout everything we produced in the game, so that it always looks like it has been drawn in that very moment by a comic artist using the same pen. Right, so we don't use cell shading, for example. We have all the animations are 2D. Like, even if things look 3D, we're using Spine, which is like a skeletal animation software, right? And even that is actually sprite based, where we have like some sprites are just lines, so we can move them around, creating 3D effects without squashing them. So these are this is like the level of care Tim kind of like burdened the art team with during the production. So yeah, these are the two things basically.
So how big was your art team? Because there's a lot of art in the game. It's a game about exploration, right?
Yeah.
So you go from one place, like from one island to another island, and each island has a bunch of different locations, and then there's underground and all that stuff. And I'm wondering, everything seems unique.
Yes.
Like all the elements and assets and so on. So I'm wondering how many people were actually involved in the development and the art production, and maybe there were some interesting solutions that you used, like you mentioned, applying like some of the skeletal animation software or some other tricks that helped you kind of reduce the time that is required to build the content.
Yeah. So I would say that on average, there was like 4 to 5 artists per month working on this for over 2 years. So that's just some average. The interesting part is, like you mentioned, things don't seem to repeat itself. Usually how 3D and 2D games are made is that you produce assets, right, graphical objects, and then they are assembled in the level editor. Like, we use Unity, and then a level artist puts them together, maybe like some tweaks and lighting and stuff. What we did is, when you look at an island, it is actually one continuous multi-layered illustrations. So a multi-layered means that the character can go behind stuff, right? So that it's more 3D. And these illustrations are ginormous. So for example, they are way too big for Photoshop files. So we had to split them up, sometimes up to like 6 Photoshop files, just so the Photoshop could open them and save them. And then they are seamlessly tiled. And that's create this sensation of things not repeating, but it also removes this sometimes like almost invisible but still there feeling of things being assembled. Right, when you have like a regular 2D game, things are being assembled, and they, even if you have like nice transitional graphics and stuff like that, it always feels a bit put together. And what our artists were able to do, since we were drawing all of each of the islands from top to bottom, just freshly drawn, is that they could really ramp up the storytelling and the way objects feel like they have been aging in the same place, right? So when grass grows on top of kind of like discarded furniture, for example, you see the grass also growing onto the rocks and up the side of the house and things like that, because they aren't assembled. They are drawn in one go. So the artist could like sometimes put things a bit at an angle, or stick them into the ground, have like tiny storytelling things. Because in other games, for example, if you, I don't know, if you want a second type of wooden barrel you want to have in the scene, it needs to go through the asset pipeline. But for us, you can draw as many different barrels as you like. You can have them damaged, you can have them open, closed, you can have like mushrooms growing out of them, whatever, because it's your canvas. You can fill it however you want. This also, on the other hand, is binding you to a layout, right? So when you feel like, okay, I don't know, like this platform needs to be 2 meters to the left, and then you have to go into the Photoshop file, find that area, cut out the platform, move it to the left, and then there's a platform-shaped hole where the platform originally was. So you have to paint that in because it's not assembled. So there's a bit of trade-off there, but we basically gave the artists full control over the environment design, like our 2D artists, which is something that felt right to us because we were previously developing point-and-click adventures with have like these complex illustrated backgrounds, but in a much smaller scale, right?
What about the way the gameplay changed? Because as you mentioned, like your previous games were more point and click.
Yeah.
And those games are also very heavy on story and kind of like figuring out the world and all those elements. But you kind of changed this and you kind of moved into a different direction here. It's there are still puzzles, but it's I mean, I would say more relaxed. They're not as like, quest heavy. And there's also a lot of explorations. You just jump around and kind of check things out and so on. So can you talk a little bit how you decided to fit the gameplay into the world and so on? Because there are different ways that you can approach it. I know that when Nintendo was building the next when they're building Mario games like Super Nintendo and so on, first they come up with mechanics.
Yes.
Like on this level, something's happening. The protagonist can do this, and then we build a level around it to kind of explain how you can manipulate. So what's your approach there, and how do you do it?
It was the gameplay serves a narrative purpose with how we do it, and we know, like we read the reviews. For many people, the gameplay is a bit too flat, right? There's the challenge is not high enough, and the player agency is not high enough, and we understand this. Because it serves the narrative purpose, and it's mostly about traversal, like what you mean with exploration, right? It's mostly about finding your way through these environments because it's a story and set piece kind of based experience. So this is where all the gameplay was in support of. And the puzzles are more about interacting with the environment. So you can like touch it and you can manipulate it, which makes it kind of more real. But also this idea of these places being abandoned, right? So the infrastructure is broken. That's what the most problems you are solving are kind of, I don't know, like, okay, so there's no ladder here. How do I improvise a way to climb up this area? Or I can't go here, so how can I go around? Things like this. This is the sort of puzzle we need to do because it's about like a deserted group of islands with only a few people left, and we wanted to illustrate this this abandonedness, which is also like abandoned places are not very heavy on, I don't know, like things happening. They are calm, right? And they have like this sometimes like eerie or oppressive nature because you don't know how safe they are, or you kind of like are kind of like try to think or feel what this place must have been before. And these are the sensations we like really wanted to bring to the forefront. So that's why there's real-time control. When you do a point-and-click adventure, it's not direct control. You kind of like click, and which is sending a command to your character so he can walk over to the point you clicked. And now we have like direct controls, like running, jumping, climbing, things like that, which is something that to us felt more immediate and more connected to the environment. Simply, as stupid as it sounds, but simply you're not using a cursor. Your character is the cursor, and you're moving through the environment. That was one of the big decisions. And then we developed a solid climbing system because we wanted verticality. So we don't want our islands just to be strips. You go from left to right. We wanted a lot of verticality. And then just a handful of types of environmental interactions, which are usually things you press or push or pull, and then there's a connected reaction in the environment, like calling an elevator or opening doors and stuff like this.
I got you. So let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about your work with the publisher and how did you kind of come up with a pitch for this game? It's not a game for, about roses and sunny days. It's like a very, a darker story, right? About, although it's like fun and interesting, it's still about trauma, about like very heavy topics. And I'm wondering, how do you sell it to a publisher? Because when, publishers are all about business.
Yes.
And what do you tell them? Like, what is the target audience? Like, what's the price going to be? Like, how did you work with them?
Okay, so I think we Mixed Vision, our publisher, right, was like the potentially best publisher to go to in that very moment, because they were we are part of their first games, and they pride themselves on being a narrative games-driven publisher. So there was a lot of kind of like convincing already done thanks to what they were looking for, right? So we pitched the game to them, and to a certain degree, the atmosphere already sold it to a certain degree. Since the story was kind of like developed during the production, it was not part of the pitch. It was more about atmosphere, specific themes, and of course the look of the game. And then they were kind of like along for the ride, following our ongoing design decisions, and we are very happy to have that be very supportive, have the publisher very supportive on that front.
Did you guys start with some kind of like a vertical slice that you had, or did you just show concept art and?
I know there was a pitch book, and because this was again, I took the project over. I know that there was a pitch book, and we built a prototype thanks to funding from the EU. But I'm not sure if the prototype was used for the pitch actually. But that would make sense. But I'm not really sure. The game already kind of like pitches well with the PDF, with the pitch book. Since we also had like the previous games, the Inner World series, where we're getting awards for, and you could play them, and they already showed what kind of like production value we could deliver. That was of course a big part of the publisher giving us their trust on the project.
So, and how did you approach marketing this game? Like, did you directly go to press? Did you try to work with maybe an agency? Did you go to events? Because it was a very challenging time, I think, when there were no events, basically, and you kind of had to do everything online. So I'm very interested to learn, how did you kind of find a way out of it?
Yeah, so this was mostly in the hands of the publisher. So that was what they were doing, and that's where we were kind of like along for the ride. So we did a lot of social media work, because we think that even snippets of our game are kind of like telling people if they like it or not. to certain, like you see if it's something for you or not, right? If you look at footage or at a GIF or something. So this is something we did, and then our publisher, of course, did the usual press kit things going on. We have multiple trailers out, and the announcement was in 2019, I think. And then there at Gamescom, people were able to play the first version, which was kind of a vertical slice of one part of the island. And then this year, I think we also launched the demo, which is like the first 45 minutes, depending on how fast you play, of the game you could get on Steam. And then a lot of smaller things, but again, that was mostly part of the work of the publisher.
Do you remember what were like the first player reactions to the title and the gameplay and all that stuff? Are they of any relevance to you, like when you're building?
They are of massive relevance, because it's so when you're a comedian and you write a joke and then you work on a show for 1.5 years, you no longer feel that your jokes are funny. You don't, like, when we work at the game, you no longer feel what the emotional impact is. You have like this idea, but you have to maintain the trust. You have to you just have to complete your work and go out. Like, no, don't get distracted by new ideas. Just stick to what you have planned. And then finally being able to get like fresh eyes on it and genuine reaction was like super, super important for us to give us some validation for what we have been doing, because you forget you forget the excitement you originally had when you did your first layouts and your designs, and then you spent like over a year turning already decided on design ideas into like a playable environment. Yeah, I hope people like it. And there's just this kind of like relief and confirmation when you see it on when you see people play it. It's sometimes there's also a bit of cringe, because especially with like puzzle games or something, you always feel like you want to do some backseat driving, because you know the solution, and then you see someone like walk in the wrong direction, go like, oh no, please don't walk into the wrong direction. No, you have to go right. But that's of course not representative for the player experience. The player's exploring. So, but that's also a feeling involved here.
Yeah. I think it's very challenging for the team as well, because as you said, they've been working on this like for a couple of years. They have no idea what's going on anymore, and showing it to the players kind of like validates this whole effort and gives it power, I guess.
Yes. The Gamescom demo was like almost 1.5 year, or a year and a few months before we completed the production. So it really validated a lot of things we were planning on doing, and gave the team a lot of energy. It was good timing to show part of the game for us as well. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your work with different platform holders? Because you published the game on a bunch of different systems. How did you work with like Sony? How did you work with Nintendo? Was it difficult or not? Like, what was your whole experience like? What did you like or dislike about this?
Unfortunately, I don't have that much insight. The working for the Switch is always an issue, because it has like significantly less power, and even though it's a 2D game, it's quite expensive on the graphics hardware, because of these huge graphic objects we're constantly loading and unloading to give this illusion of this one huge island, right? So there's a lot of assets the game needs to move at any given moment. So porting it to the Switch was not easy. we worked with an external porting studio called Massive Mini Team. They did the porting for us. So they were mostly involved in, like, they had most of the technical hassle, which was fortunately not our thing. And when it comes to any sort of deals and communication, it was mostly the publisher or the producers who had to tackle things. Overall, there's no big uh, anecdotes about like huge problems or things that kind of like went out of line or something. But we also we didn't want much. We have a few achievements, and it's a single player game. You play from start to finish. There's no multiplayer component. So let's go. Your microphone is off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. It's not a real call if somebody doesn't say you're on mute. So now we're officially launched. So did you feel that maybe you wanted to, when you were building the game, did you have any problems kind of figuring out in which direction it's going to go, whether you want to have it as like a single player adventure game, or whether you wanted to, to build it more into like a multiplayer project and so on? Or build DLCs or something like that? Because I'm asking this from the point of view of like pure economics.
Yes.
And I had this conversation with a bunch of publishers and game developers and so on. So I'm wondering, what's your look at it, and how do you kind of value this sort of thing?
So well, let's be real here. It's a niche game. Like, so it's it was never destined to reach like some like huge mainstream gamer audience. It's story driven. It has a very unique but also like off mainstream look, and so there was no pressure for us in the team to kind of like make the most market value out of it. So there was never any talk about any DLCs or microtransactions, and the game itself was conceived as an single player adventure from the very moment of its inception. So there was never any discussion of, I don't know, like finding ways to squeeze out additional money or prolong its like or any sort of service or something like this. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Because if you build a game like this and you start selling it, it sells for a period of time and then it stops. I mean, you can do maybe some discounts here and there, take part in different sales, but it's not that you're kind of keeping this interest forever and trying to push more stuff. That's why I'm asking this.
It has its window. It has its moment, and then eventually that like the release year, maybe there's a bit like there's like tiny spikes maybe here and there because of a sale or an award or something like this, right? But there's like the big beginning, and then it's going to kind of like fade out and kind of like noise in a very low spectrum. Yeah.
During this whole development process, what did you feel was the biggest challenge? Like what were the things that you were kind of fighting most with?
I think the biggest challenge was actually scoping the game, like really like identifying how much we need to produce and how long that will take, and how to kind of like turn it into a neat package, because it's not just about like making more or less. It needs to have like, the story has an arc, and the arc needs to land, right? So these restructurings were quite a challenge. When we first had this thing announced, and it was at Gamescom and playable, we announced it for the first quarter of 2020. That was our first announcement, and we published it over a year later. So the scoping and actually wrapping production up so that the story has everything it needs, but also not more than it needs, which was the bigger problem, actually. There was just too many ideas. That was a big challenge. I really recommend for teams to build like a really representative vertical slice very, very early in the production, which was, for example, that thing we showed at Gamescom was like a vertical slice, 17 minutes of gameplay, but gameplay without any major aspects missing. There was even like voice acted narration was already there. All the puzzles were there. Basically all layers of visual effects were already there. So just really just build it. And then it was after that it was like really easy to identify how much like a unit of game will cost, right? So you could see like, okay, it's 10 minutes of game. How much did it cost to produce? And then you were able to kind of like scope the game in accordance to your budget and to your needs. And then we decided to expand because there was we believed in the story and what we wanted to produce, and so we expanded it. And it's actually quite massive because considering the fact that there's barely any asset reuse. The underground areas have asset reuse, but the islands itself have barely any, right? So it's really like it's hours of freshly produced content for like 4 or 5 hours. So that was quite a massive undertaking. It's really a lot of content. And I think if we had made the game in a more traditional asset catalog style of way, I think it would be different. Not saying worse, but it would be different, but it would also have been much cheaper. So yeah, that was the big challenge, was to see like what the game we wanted to make actually entails, and then forming a strategy to bring it to completion and to have the game feature everything we wanted to have. That was a big challenge.
And do you feel like the players right now, they appreciate it? Do you feel like they see the effort that goes into the game, and are they willing to kind of support it with sales and so on?
I won't talk about sales because our publisher is going to send someone after me if I do this, because that's their prerogative to talk about it. But I can tell from the reaction that even if people disagree with our gameplay choices, that they absolutely appreciate what we have built and the stuff you can explore and discover. And I really, really believe people have not played a game that is built that way and that feels that delivers in that like this massive scale of really unique and intertwined places to discover, and this density of detail and environmental storytelling and things. In the end, it was worth it. It was like super exhausting and expensive, but we believe it was worth it.
Okay. Well, Anjin, I think you kind of gave a little bit of piece of advice to like a fellow indie developers, but if you could summarize, what would be your like main things not to do when you're developing a game, if you're talking to your colleague from Europe or United States or anywhere? Like, what are things not to do?
Don't fall in love with ideas in your head or sketchbook. Fall in love with ideas you can actually produce to completion, because in the end, that is what is going to make the difference. Sometimes you can produce much less than you would like, but sometimes also a game would be bloated and unnecessarily full of stuff if you realize everything you want to do. So really think hard and do research and build stuff and learn from it early in the production, so you actually know what you want to build and not just what kind of ideas you love. That's I mean, it's we knew that before. It's like it's usual wisdom. Like ideas are cheap, right? To a certain degree. So, yeah, learn from our mistakes. It's just
I think it's a great way to kind of end this podcast. So, Anjin, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I love the game. So, if anybody wants to check it out, I'll leave the link in the description to our YouTube video, and you can check it out on Steam and all the other platforms out there. So, thank you so much, and have a wonderful year of sales, I guess.
thank you very much. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the 80 level article. I am an avid reader, actually.
Great. Oh, we try not to disappoint you. Thank you so much. See ya.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. That was great. Bye.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.